Welcome, churchy parents, and welcome to our third cycle of our Learner's Toolkit for Parent program. Today, we are going to focus on how you as a parent can best support your son in their exams. Whether your son is in year 7 and he's just starting his journey navigating exams, or you have a son or even a daughter facing the challenges that we often experience as teachers when students are facing with their Year 12 final exams. Thank you again for joining us, and a reminder that we have the chat that's live. Thank you also for the parents who engaged in the YouTube comments from the previous habit session, and many of the things that we spoke about in habits we're going to touch upon again today. What's really important with today is this is all around advice. Thank you to the feedback. We're going to de-emphasize, theory and really focus on practical, grounded advice that we see has a significant and positive impact on a student's performance. This cycle, in weeks 7 and 8 of term 3, every year 7, 8, 9, and 10 ALT or a Learner's Toolkit class has seen or will see a version of this PowerPoint. In that PowerPoint, we actually, and we will share this out with you through my churchy, is there's a really good video by a young Australian medical student who looked at what cramming does at the student layer. And much about what we're going to talk to you about today is basically an anti-cramming narrative. As I said to my little year 7 ALT class, I had to be very honest with them. When I was a student, both at school and university, I was a pretty proficient and well-traveled crammer. Maturing a little bit, I can see why I did what I did, but I can also see that just because it worked for me, and remember the conditions of assessment that you faced as a student, whether that be at school or at university, is vastly different to what a student experiences today. We need to get across very clearly that the rules of the game or the rules of engagement have significantly changed for your sons and daughters. And what we need to understand is just because something worked for you, it worked for you because possibly the conditions of the assessment actually allowed it to occur. And what we need to understand, though, is that if we don't understand that the conditions have changed, we're creating what they call a hegemony, which is basically the practices of the past will continue unchallenged into the future, even though they're ill-fitted. And we see that across broad aspects of today's society. So we're going to get straight into it. I'm not going to waste your time, and we're going to get straight into it. So Learner's Toolkit, we've really focused in on how, what to do and what not to do. To start with, we are going to focus on attacking the fact that students do rely on cramming. Now, there is only one pro for cramming, and we need to understand that cramming is actually, from a science perspective, a cognitive science perspective, the most optimal method for learning in which you only need to retain for a very short period of time 3 to 4 weeks of material that you will never use again. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I have crammed for many different types of tests, whether it be my boat license test, my learners. I'm just being really honest. Okay, I sat and went through that booklet the night before I went and did my learners. And what do you know? I failed. I failed a few times, actually. And unfortunately, I didn't learn from my mistakes because I just kept on repeating the same mistake. And therefore, the outcome remained the same. But that's just me. So I would say that cramming, and what we need to understand is that in the early formative stages of a student's journey, the amount of work that they need to retain is actually somewhat fits within this period of time. So therefore, the fact that it works, or they think it works, or there's the appearance that it works, actually creates a misconception. It's like a seed that sits there, is planted, and over a period of time, a lack of real routine, a lack of real strategy, and repeated behaviors waters that seed. And then that seed turns into a tree or a plant, and it has pretty deep roots because it's built on a belief, not by actual reality. And we often see this when things are born on beliefs, they become very deep rooted within each of us. So how do we, and this is the thing, cramming is actually a fairly, I would say, hazardous approach to learning. It actually sets up and creates a number of fundamental problems that extend well beyond just the performance. So let's look at the cons. So we decided to be honest with the boys. Here's the pros, here's the cons. Number one, students who often cram, they basically get an average score, they generally pass. The majority of information, so the majority of their effort is wasted because by the time they finish, all that information just disappears because it's held in our short-term or working memory. Often crammers have a really poor night's sleep the night before, so they're often pretty much fatigued. Why? Because they're under stress. They've left things to the last minute. It's like me and my tax. I basically leave my tax to the last opportunity, and then there's this increased level of anxiety and stress, and there's a weekend of me sitting down in a room trying to trawl through receipts, bank statements, and all sorts of stuff to do my tax. Each year, I make the decision that next year, I'm going to be more organized. I buy a folder, I do collect my receipts, but if I don't change my behavior, I'm going to be back in 12 months' time in the same situation. This is what happens with students because it's a habit, it's a behavior. In particular, when we are stressed, we feel our brain becomes overworked. It becomes and we start to feel anxious, frustrated, and fatigued. And what's really interesting is that these three things are creating a very toxic, and I use the term toxic in its full definition, because we're basically impairing our brain. We are actually impairing the function of our cognitive toolkit. And as a result, what happens is there's generally bad side effects. So this is the video. This is a really honest video, and we won't watch it today because I'm really mindful of giving you practical tips. But we're going to share it and you can have a look at that. So how should we prepare for exams? 4-step process. This is where we get the practicals. Now, the reason why they're 4 steps is that we need a process. Exam prep is all about process, and it's all about strategy. Step 1. The biggest mistake that students make, and we see it quite often, is they haven't done, number 1, they haven't done the necessary groundwork or foundational study throughout the term. So they arrive in week 6 or 7 or 8, and their exam is in, say, a week or 2's time. There's this belief that I can keep putting it off and off and off. But the issue is, I go back to my tax example. I'm going to put it off and off and off. I'll do it in the September holidays. I'll do it on that public holiday in October. The issue is that we just put it off and put it off. And what we're doing is we're allowing the snowball to roll down the hill. And as the snowball rolls, snowball gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Before we know it, we've got a massive avalanche facing us. So where do we start? Number 1, we need to assess where you're at. We need to clearly articulate what I can do, what I can't do. So the best way to do that is the practice test. The practice test is designed by the expert, aka the teacher. There's always a marking scheme. And most importantly, the practice test must be sat under exam conditions. We do not want the practice test to be used like a worksheet or an open book activity, because the rules of the game that an exam is must be followed and practiced. The reason why students don't finish exams has got as much to do with poor knowledge as it is a lack of strategy. So if our students don't practice the exam taking strategy, how are they going to be good at exams. And this is where we actually need to use the practice test, sitting under exam conditions with the time. We have to be very clear. If it's a 70-minute exam with a 10-minute perusal, then that's what we must follow, because we are rehearsing the game, which is an exam, which is very, very important. Step 2, this is where you can come in as parents and you can be a valuable tool. Mark it. Help your son or daughter sit down with the solutions and mark it. Or get your son to find a buddy and mark it. In my classes, we mark it in class, and I'm going to do that actually with my year 8. We sat the practice exam under conditions, then we get the solutions, I get them to switch their exams and we mark it. Why do they switch their exams? Because we need as much objectivity at this point as possible. We do not want our students or your son to be a little bit loose with how they apply the criteria. Oh, I'm going to give myself a little bit more here because, in the real exam, I'm going to know what to do here. No. What we're doing is we're creating an illusion without being clear and articulate with how it's going to be marked. From this point, then the student needs to sit down and they need to identify what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses. And this strategy we see all the time used in sport. And sport presents us with a really clear and direct and observable guide here. And the All Blacks are the classic example under Steve Hansen, not under their current coach, but under their previous coach. What they did was they clearly articulated, this is what we can do, this is what we need work on. Now, the thing is, the reason why we need to do this, and I use the term from the actual All Blacks, and if you read their book, Legacy, they talk about their focus on attacking the gap. They focus on the gap within individuals, the gap within the team, and then the gap within the game. And what we want to do here, and we'll see an example of why we do this, we actually want to focus on the things we can't do. Why? Because we need to first identify the fact that we actually can do something. That will actually improve our attitude and our belief in our ability to get future success. If we make the assumption, or your son makes the assumption, that they know nothing and they have to relearn an entire term, semester, year, 2 years worth of work, what does that do to an individual's levels of stress and anxiety? Puts it through the roof. So what we need to be clear is we need to chase the weakness. We need to have faith that the strength will remain a strength. And what's really clear here is that if it's a strength today, it's likely to continue to be a strength in a week's time or 2 weeks' time. If I've been able to remember something from 3 months ago, I'm likely, highly likely, to remember it in a week's time. But often, students do not take that position and they focus on protecting their strength. Now, if you focus on protecting your strength, you know what's going to happen? Nothing's going to change. There will be no improvement, because the reason why there's no improvement is not about edifying our strength. It's about addressing those aspects that have the greatest scope for return. This is behavioral economics, and we're going to get into this. And then attacking the gap is where we focus in our attention. We focus on the thing that is our biggest gap and we work on it. And we're going to look at some subject-specific strategies soon. And then we go back to step 4. Once we've done some practice, we've done some really focused work, and we go back and do the practice test again. This time, we've got to be really careful that we've actually done the test already. So therefore, we're somewhat familiar with it. So as a result, you either reduce the time, let's say 5 to 10 minutes, or you ask your son or daughter to go the reverse order. What you're wanting to do is you're not wanting to allow familiarity become a crutch. And that is a massive issue when we see students who just practice with doing the same practice exam over and over and over and over and over again. They become good because they're learning and rehearsing the practice exam and not actually learning the content. And this is what I mean. Why we focus on our gaps and not reinforce our strengths. So this is a clear example. When I did this with my year 7 class, I asked them the question, where did your eyes go? And they all said, bar 2 students, the blue line. Of course, as humans, We are geared to look for the positives, actually. That is actually a proven fact. The issue is by looking at the positives, we overlook the fact that if we look at that blue line, I'm already at 90%. That's a pretty good result. Now, the question is, if I spend an hour of my time or half an hour of my time, how much will that time actually improve that result? Not much. Why? Because the gap for improvement is minuscule. There's not much space to improve. And therefore, to actually improve objectively, we actually have to pour in heaps of time, more time. Look at Olympic swimmers. See how much time they actually have to put into the pool to improve a fraction of a second. Same thing happens with our brain when it comes to exams. The two boys who identified the grey, they didn't actually look at the gold. They said, and what's really interesting, this points to how students can sometimes be trained and geared. And they basically said, look, that weakness is a profound weakness. They actually used the term profound. They said that if I can improve that, I'm going to have a much greater return on my investment, behavioral economics, for what I get. Also, it's much easier for me to go from, say, 20% to 40% or 20% to 50% than it is to go from 90% to even 92%. And what's key here is that focusing on your gaps will lead to the greatest improvement. But the issue is that when students are under stress or duress, we don't focus on our weakness. We try to protect our strength. Okay? Why? Because stress is in play. And when stress is in play, our body is actually gearing itself. It's called fight or flight, or fight, flight, or freeze. Our body is actually producing hormones from our pituitary and adrenal glands that actually regulates our brain in such a way that it will either fight, flight, or freeze. What happens is most of the time, our students freeze or flight on the strength. They go, I'm just going to protect this thing. I'm going to protect. The kids who fly away give up. But if we can change the narrative and focus on the weakness, then something powerful and profound can change from this process. Next. So what we've done here is we've gone to the heads of faculty at the school. We've had a lot of them give us some really great subject-specific advice. And we're going to start with the big one, English. I have a colleague in the UK who did a significant review of cognitive science in schools. And they said the number one subject that very rarely gets any mention in the cognitive science, science of learning conversation is English. And what happens is English is actually quite a difficult subject to study for, because it's often about the mode of the assessment, and you'll see that with languages soon. But also we have different things like poetry, persuasive text, we might have short story, we might have analytical essay. And the key thing here is that each of those have a slightly different twist on the same coherent set of strategies, or might require new strategies to come in. So therefore, we actually have to practice the strategy. English, let's have a look at it really quickly. Number one, do a practice task, a writing task under exam conditions. Actually practice the speed at which a student writes in a confined period of time. What's really important here is we actually have to practice the preparation time, because preparation is really important. The balance between preparation and actually writing our essay, and having sufficient time to proofread it. That's actually a really hard balance to have, because we feel like if we unbake or underbake preparation, then my essay is not going to be great. As a result, we start putting more time on the preparation, which means less time for writing, and then that becomes rushed. And as we rush, then we have errors. And because we're running out of time, we don't proofread. So this is what we need to do. We need to practice writing under exam conditions. Then we need to seek feedback from someone who's not you. This could be you as a parent, a buddy, a brother or sister, or the teacher. The issue is that this takes time. And to get good feedback, the student has to be very proactive and get on the front foot. We're not talking about here, my English exam is on Friday this week, and I'm going to go to my teacher today at 3 p.m. and ask for feedback. That's just not, to be fair to the teacher, plausible or fair. But also it's not fair for the student because they're actually undercooking themselves. Then when we get back out, let's look at some of the strategies for addressing. Number one, practice the planning phase. Actually practice planning. Start with a question. Ask your teacher. The boys can ask their teachers for various different scenarios or questions or whatever, and then practice planning. Practice planning, practice planning, practice planning. If planning becomes more efficient, it becomes better and more effective. Next, then what we can do is look at writing thesis statement, which is really, really important. And this is geared at some of the older boys' assessment, in particular, year 11 and 12. Writing a really good thesis statement is the corner bed or the capstone or the cornerstone, if we think about building, of the essay. If that's not great, then the whole essay will fall down like a building. Then we want to look at brain dumping, knowledge. Brain dumping allows us to, one, retrieve the knowledge and then make linkages. Why do we need to make linkages between knowledge? Because good essays are built on a foundation of creating cohesive, connected ideas. And we actually need, as human beings, to train ourselves to do that. Okay? Then you might do quotes. Okay? Quotes are really great, only if you remember them. So you could use flashcards. Get on Quizlet, put a few flashcards of some quotes, and then bada bing, bada boom, boom. I can sit an exam for an unseen question. I might have, say, 10 or 15 really great quotes that I could use for a variety of exam questions. I'm in such a great place. And that's the thing. I need to train myself. And then you go back and write again. Now, the beauty with writing is you could put script A and script B right next to each other, and you can compare and contrast and see the growth. Maths and science. This is really clear. Practice test, practice test, practice test. Practice test under exam conditions with the right equipment. No open book. Okay, planning, preparation, all done. Okay, next, market. Again, we talk about get a buddy, get a peer, get you to quickly market. What's really interesting is that we want to be as brutal in terms of the feedback at this layer here. If we're not, we're actually allowing misconceptions or incorrect knowledge or no knowledge to persevere. And we need to address it now. Then we can do things like, for example, pre-made worksheets. So for example, at Churchy, we have Jack Plus, which is our textbook, and we have Style in science. So if the student, for example, doesn't know how to find a percentage of amount, they can literally go to their Jack Plus, go to the table of contents, look for that in their textbook, they click it, and it directly goes to that part of the textbook. We don't have to flick through the textbook. The beauty of Jack Plus and Style is it's self-marking, which means that you don't have to mark it, the student doesn't have to mark it, the student doesn't need to find the answers, they're already there. They can get immediate feedback. Gold. Online quizzes. Online quizzes are great, especially when they self-mark. The other element here, we can look at quick reviews. We can use, for example, things like Khan Academy. Khan Academy is a free and open video tutorial service, which was pretty much focused on maths and science, where you can go and search for a particular topic, and there'll be a video with work examples and self-marking questions. That's just gold because the student can be completely focused. And then we go back to step 4, languages. Now, languages like English are pretty tricky to study for because we actually have 4 exam modes. We have reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Each exam period, generally there are 2 exams that are picked. And what we see here is when we look at the reading, and when we're just going to go over this and gloss over it a little bit because of time, I'm mindful of keeping this to 30 minutes, is you have to focus and look at reading as the principal mechanism, which what we're going to read and learn. What's really interesting, reading, when it comes to obviously reading practice, okay, when we look at the ways that we get around it, we've got things like flashcards, Quizlet, awesome. Why are flashcards and Quizlet awesome? 1, often someone else makes them. 2, someone else has done the answers. 3, it gives you immediate feedback. Teachers will often give out essential lists of vocab. And what's really clear here is that you're wanting to practice. So reading exam, all practice has to be about reading. When we come to writing, now this is really key. What we've seen with some of our senior school students is that, in particular IB students, where they actually have to write for a prolonged period of time in the script of their language, it comes back to planning. And what they do is, for example, when it comes to language writing, it's all about vocab, sentence starters, conjugations, and the fundamentals that are going to build, like a wall, a great piece of writing. But therefore, the practice has to be that. So, for example, there was a senior school student last year, and they would brain dump out. He went through and identified the most common and usable and adaptable sentence starters in Chinese. So what the student did was he would brain dump out. He found there was about 15 or 18. Boom, they came out. Then what he would do, he was also then brain dump out the key vocab, the conjugations, all those fundamentals. And he had 10 minutes of planning, and boom, they were there, and he could basically just get started and get straight into it. Listening exam is all about sitting on your device, unfortunately, okay, being focused, which is a thing that must be trained. Put in the headphones, because that's what happens in the real exam, and they listen to the provided audio scripts, which are on My Churchy and in their OneNote. They're all there, and they basically listen to exemplar listening tasks, and they write out in a similar vein what would happen in a real test. Again, what you're doing here is it's all about the mode. And you see in here, it's all about listening to vocab recordings. Listen to the audio files that are present and also that are found in the textbook. Use recordings in Quizlets, okay? Listen to the stuff that comes through the Education Perfect that the boys have access to. Speaking. Now, this is hard because speaking requires two people. Either you can be the second person or your son finds a buddy. My daughter's doing Chinese. She's in year 7. And what's really interesting here, I struggle at best with any form of language. But basically, when we practice speaking, she practices speaking at me. And the thing is, she gets so much out of speaking with someone, even though I probably have no idea what's going on. It's the act of practicing the speaking. It's the fact that I can give feedback. I can also build a little bit of pressure, which is what happens in an exam, and she can get used and accustomed to the pressure. So, top tips for parents, and this is where we're going to finish off. Number 1, sleep. There's heaps of stuff that's come out recently that a good night's sleep or good sleep leading to an exam is better than nutrition, hydration, and nearly everything else. Your son needs a good night's sleep. That means no late nights or all-nighters. Okay, gone are the days of doing an all-nighter and cramming. 1, your brain is fatigued. If any of you are doctors and you are on a 24-hour shift, tell me how you are in the first 2 hours versus the last 2 hours. When are you most likely to make mistakes? When are you most likely to become irritable? When are you most likely to make an error, misstep, miscalculation, or whatever? Sleep is vastly underrated and super important. Number 2, remove all devices and distractions from your son's workspace leading into the exam block. It goes out, gets put in a cupboard, locked away. That's what I do for my children. And then for that period of a week or 2, they're focused. What's really key here is a short-term pain for long-term gain. Once exam blocks out, the reward is, for their pre-identified reward, is they get it back. And that works really well for me. It might not work well for you, but if a student's trying to study and their mobile phone's pinging off, or their PlayStation's over there, or some other devices over in the corner, split attention. Students are wasting their time. During breaks, focus on rest, nutrition, and hydration. Also, with your study sessions, they should be between, say, 20 to 30 minutes with a good 5 to 10 minute break. Sitting in their room an entire weekend before an exam block is very much counterproductive. 1, they're going to be overloaded with content. Number 2, they're going to be quite fatigued by the end. Number 3, they're not going to be in a good place what's going to happen is often we get a bit of stress and anxiety in that equation. And if they sit in that room, the question is, how productive are they being? Whereas if you go and say, okay, we're going to take this day and squash it into 3 hours. And in that 3 hours, you're going to do 6 sessions, 6 25-minute sessions with a 5-minute break. And I want you to work at 100%. Imagine how much work gets done in 3 hours compared to sitting in a room for 8 hours. So that's where we end today. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate your engagement today. If there are any questions, can you please put them in the chat now? A reminder that I periodically go back through and check the stuff on my Churchy, whether it be the study strategy poll or the blog that was on the habits at home. Some really great stuff there. Also, thank you for the questions that are on YouTube. I'll answer them as soon as I get them. So thank you very much for your time today. I'll leave this open for another minute or so. And if you have any questions, can you please write them in the chat? Thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate you investing in this session. It's our way of actually helping you deal with the challenges that we're starting to see in a ramped up academic high stakes system of standardized exams. And what's really clear here is it's all about establishing good habits and routines, good strategy identification, and keeping it simple. So I'll just wait for a few more, a minute or so. If there are any questions, a reminder that after today, I will post back into my Churchy a link that will also have our PowerPoint where you can sit down and more wholesomely engage with the content, in particular the subject-specific strategies. Final session for this term. And at this point, at the end of this term, we'll engage with the parental community if they're interested at extending this any further. We're going to look at what happens when the results come back in. We need to understand that when the results come back in, this is where we get an opportunity to talk about feedback, improvement, and then the last one, when failure or the results don't meet expectations. We actually need to have an honest conversation about what that means and what we can do as a result. Because feedback, aka correction, should be seen as the greatest learning tool. But we sometimes see feedback as a sign of failure. The issue is failure at this stage compared to failure out in the real world. Where is the greatest cost of that failure? Should we not give corrective feedback and strong feedback and identify failure now, or do we wait? Do we wait until your son goes to university, in which failure at university, one, drives a financial cost to your son in their HECS bill. Number two, time. They'll be behind in their degree. Every subject they fail, there's another 6 months at uni and not 6 months in the workplace. So I haven't got any questions today. Thank you very much for your participation today. Thank you very much for the parents who asked the questions and watched the video at a later date. And I really, again, am appreciative of you taking your time to engage with us here at Churchy. You have a great day and see you in a fortnight's time. Bye.